Hi everyone, welcome to Hope It Helps part take two. And our guest on the show today is Mr. Richard Fitzgerald. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Khaled. Thanks for having me on. We had a little bit of a press record issue there, but no, really good to be on. I hope it helps. Glad we didn't make it to the end.
Thank God I caught it when I did. So sorry about that, man. Guys, if you haven't heard about Richard, you've definitely heard about Lovin Dubai, which everyone here knows. And I know you guys also have Lovin Saudi and Smashi TV as well. And I know you guys have been in the market for about 6 years. You know, you're looking to expand the concept of loving into multiple, different countries and stuff. And I've heard that you've had some challenges in different markets. It's a bit harder and so on. But I know you guys also produce content and everything. So I wanted to just dive in today with Richard into a couple of things, about media, about, the industry, your experience in it, and I guess some of the things that maybe have made Lovin Dubai so successful and how we can launch that. But Before we get into everything, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah,
and we'll take it from there.
So thank you. It's good to be on the podcast. I'm always impressed by content creators like you going about this. So nice to be on. Thank you. I come from the countryside in Ireland. I studied in Dublin. And after graduating, I ended up sort of looking for a role in advertising marketing industry. It was about 2006. I was reading about digital, so I navigated my way into that field and then got passionate about social media and sort of grew from there. Moved to London to a big social media agency and then a media agency. My career was sort of growing. 4 or 5 years later, I ended up in Dubai as a social media director for a big group, and they had 12 offices across the region. So it really exposed me to the Arab world, and I got to really like it. Got to enjoy the different cultural nuances and things like that. And and then in 2015, I'm here 10 years. I was a bit restless. I wanted a sort of a challenge, and I ended up basically setting up Lovin Dubai, and it's grown from there into Augustus Media and other brands.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, and that's a really great story. One thing from the research I did was, so I know you worked in Dublin. That's where you started, then moved to London, and then you came here. Now, from what I heard from your story on the previous podcast was that in each place you grew in different levels, but one thing that was a common throughout, and what kind of forced you, I guess not forced you, but led you to really take that leap and launch your own company, was that you felt that they never matched your ambition in terms of what they were trying to do. You always wanted that director role, but they wouldn't give it to you. They would, I'll wait for a year, but you didn't want to wait. So there seemed to be a common theme. So I guess where I want to start is from your mindset perspective. What was it, I guess, through all, because you've been in the industry for a very long time at that point, almost 10 years. What was it about that, that click that you're like, you know what, I'm not waiting for anyone anymore. It's my time to do it, because it's a scary thing.
Yeah, there definitely was the jumping off point of being an employee, and to jump off. But it was kind of gradual for me, and I still feel like I'm an employee here, right? I still act like and work like an employee. I just maybe a bit more responsibility, but there was definitely a jumping off point where it was a bit scary. But I think it's like everything. If you have a drive for something, if you want to make something happening, the timing mightn't happen at the right as soon as you think. But eventually it happens, and eventually it happened for me. And it wasn't. There were times when I spoke to people while I was working in social media agencies to set up social media agencies. Like this happened from 2009, 2010, 2014, 2015. Like I spoke to investors, someone I'd meet in another agency, and if we were chatting outside of work, we'd talk about it. It was always there, but it was never there, but it was always there. And this isn't a social media agency, and this is basically what I ended up with. Yeah. But it's in the same space, and I still feel like it's very similar.
Yeah. It's interesting. I didn't know that you had all those, separate conversations a lot over the years about, what would it look like to set up a social media agency and so on, and speaking to investors as well to getting that insight. Do you feel that now, reflecting back, I guess all those conversations about that, thinking about like setting it up, and maybe also from a concept of, investors, what are they looking for? Do you feel like that has helped you in launching it?
Yeah, Khaled, I think like my approach is I'm kind of a transparent, open book kind of person, and if I'm trying to figure something out, I kind of talk about it. I talk about it in podcasts. I talk about it with friends, and it's just a process, really. The ambitions and plans for this company, I'm figuring out by talking about them, by bouncing them off people and things like that. And it would have been the same process with thinking. What does a social media agency look like? Is it a real-time agency? Is it the Gary Vaynerchuk approach of just churning out loads and loads of content? Would brands like that? Like all these type of things. And one of the big questions I think people have is when they do a career for 10, 20 years and when they're in an industry, they feel like, and this is just a view, but they feel like that there's two realizations. One is that they want to do something else, but they feel like they need a unique idea, and they underestimate their experience, and they underestimate doing the same thing with a different culture. Doing the exact same thing, like you've done it for 10, 15 years. Who is employing you? Nothing. It's just a name, it's a brand, bit of culture, and someone who's got clients, and some boss or someone else who may or may not be better than you, so that's it. And then on the other side, then people sort of don't believe in themselves on that level, and then they try and think that their industry is broken because they have frustrations with it.
Okay.
The industry isn't broken. If an industry is generating revenues and profitable, how can it be broken?
Fair.
It might be out of date on some levels and needing revamping, but it isn't broken. So they try and find the one thing that they think is wrong with their current job, which actually might be born out of frustration. And then they pick something very unique, and then they say that that's going to disrupt it. And sometimes it does in the startup world, but other times it doesn't, because what they're coming up with isn't really needed, and what they're coming up with, it won't replace the fact of the matter of what this current industry is producing. There's supply and demand already in the industry, and I think in our industry and services, people would often tell me that the model is dead. In media, that the model is dead. But ambitious, smart people can come up with a new way to reach that sort of fragmented media audience, right? So you can still have a good media buying and creative agency. It mightn't be a traditional agency like they had for TV ads, but it can still be a creative agency. And the same with journalism. Journalism, just because local newspapers are shutting down and people aren't paying for the print, doesn't mean that journalism is dead. Like, consumption happens in media. So how do you create a version of that? And we did that. We did that without raising big valuation and without disrupting anything. We just literally believed that you could do something with experience. That's what we did.
I think something you said is really refreshing, and I actually only had this realization I'd say 2 months ago. So I'm the host of the AUD podcast as well. So we had a guest on, and he's the guy he's the CEO of Brands for Less. And when I was doing my research and listening to his story, it echoed what you were talking about, in the sense that he went to the States once. He saw TJ Maxx, he saw that model, and he's like, okay, that doesn't exist here. And he went and did it, and look at him now. And I think,
nice.
Yeah, and I've talked about how that I think there's a misconception with entrepreneurship is that it has to, like you were saying, it has to be a unique idea. No, can I do it better, faster? Is there a new medium for me to, produce X product or so on? But one thing that I think is really interesting is, I think when it comes to I'm curious to get your perspective on this. In Dubai, there's a million agencies, like millions and millions. And, you know, I know many friends who have worked in them. My fiance works in one, and I hear the stories, and like as an account manager, like what happens to you sounds like a disaster. And I think, do you think, for example, with the landscape here, and I guess the working culture mindset here, that there is space for something to change like that, or is it just, you know, if you go from one to another, it's another day, just, you know, same kind of stuff?
It doesn't have to be. I think if you're leading to the same kind of stuff in a negative way, it doesn't have to be. You know, there can be healthy environments. You know, agencies can have good cultures. It is the service industry. You know, it's like having a crappy restaurant job and a good restaurant job. You know, agency served me well. I've had difficult jobs. I worked in like 6 or 7 agencies over sort of 10 years or so, and well, not even, but around that. And then, but you know, like there are times where I found it difficult. I found the environment stressful, both the external environment of the service industry and the internal environment, and I had anxiety and things like that. But you know, I don't hear, and I don't, you know, it's something that we culturally look out for. You know, there was one of our offices that was happening in this year, and I felt that was the one thing I wanted to solve. Like, before making profits in that office, I didn't want anyone leaving or going home at night feeling stressed because of the environment that we created. You know, so you can talk all sorts of empathy, all sorts of sort of things like that. But I do believe in the agency model. I believe in working in the office, not working from home. I believe in a career. I believe in learning at different levels. I believe in different skills, learning about leadership, learning about management. And I like the industry that we're in because it's services, but it's also applied. You really have to think. You know, to do your job well, you have to think. And it's lateral thinking. It's understanding client problems. It's coming up with solutions. It's learning all the time. It's really dynamic, and it's always on.
Yeah, that part, that's for sure. It is definitely always on. But I get what you're talking about, you know. And so I'm curious, working when you mentioned a good point that you stressed on, which is you are in the service industry. So it kind of comes with its own, what's the word, like requirements, should we say, or expectations. You know, clients are not the most forgiving people. Speaking as both a client and someone who has been on the other side, I can definitely attest to that. But it's interesting that you think that there's space for you to, if the culture is good enough, it can offset, I guess, some of the maybe challenges or realities of the industry. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think you have to work on yourself. You know, it's that growth mindset versus fix. Like, you can't just blame the industry or blame your company and go jumping around to different companies and hope something changes. Like, you can, but think of sport, right? If a footballer changes team the whole time because he can't get in the team, like, whose fault is it? The club or him? Like, you know, or her? Like, but I think that you can definitely work on yourself through these environments. Sometimes it's toxic. Sometimes you need to figure it out. But, you know, I say service industry because it's what I know. And we have a lot of clients. We do a lot of branded content at Augustus Media on Lovin Dubai and lots of things like that. But also we serve an audience. Yeah. So we create content for the public, often for free. And then we also... we also then might have customers. So if someone pays for subscription or something like that, so that's the customer part is like having a restaurant with a customer. The client part is a little bit more B2B. You know, they are demanding, but they're not as demanding as having a burger shop or whatever. It's not every 5 minutes or whatever. They kind of they do tend to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 6, kind of not at the moment, but you know, so I think it's all different on service levels. Like, obviously the creative industry and the marketing industry isn't the same as different type of service jobs. There's a higher profit margin, there's a higher premium, and different things like that, and usually you get paid a bit more. But yeah, I think it's a good framework to think about this as well, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. You know, I think applying, you know, that kind of mindset to not just, you know, yourself, but maybe to the work you do, to the industry you're in. I know I think the football example you used is good. If a player does jump around from club to club and he's not being picked or he's not starting, at some point, you know, you kind of have to look at, okay, yeah, maybe I am the problem. But on football, since I know that's something you like and you're a Blackburn Rovers supporter, which is, you know, a shame. You must be going through a very tough time over the last few years. But you also did some coaching. I know you did some coaching, and you talked about how you sometimes implement, you take from that experience and implement it in the work you do now. And you said that business is the ultimate sport because there's no end game. Unlike, you know, an athlete that has a finite time, you know, you got to make the most of their career in that time, and, you know, that's it. And business, like you said, I think you mentioned Warren Buffett, he's still chilling and he's still running companies. God knows how old he is at this point. So talk us through, I guess, the parallels you see between like managing, for example, a football team or sports and, you know, running a business.
Yeah, I think I could even go further than the time that a player has being. The other reason why I think business is the ultimate sport is you can actually write your own narrative. You know, after a player finishes, they can coach, but they're coaching in a club that they don't own, and they're a manager in a club. Like, what does Jose Mourinho own? What does Alex Ferguson own? Some horses. I'm joking, but no. But I mean, you know, I mean, he doesn't own. So what I like about business, and there are some, like, you know, like David Beckham kind of owns Inter Miami, and I think, you know, I think that's interesting. Like, I think good. You know, we're looking at what's happening Ronaldo at the moment, and if he had the right advisors, you know, would they have got him a deal that got him equity in a club as opposed to just this big salary, you know? And how would that change things in the future? Because I think that's interesting. Like, the business of sport is one thing, like you can own clubs and things like that. But going back to the question, I just like that sort of business. You can write a narrative. Like, the Berkshire Hathaway model can't be replicated. It's basically a dividends business, right? Yeah. Like the analysts don't really get that one right, but like, it's basically a dividends business. So and you know, but he's kind of uniquely created it, and I think I'm kind of inspired by that. Like, I think, you know, you don't necessarily have to follow one path. You don't have to follow what people are saying. You don't have to follow, let's go down this, you know, Series A, B, C, VC thing. You don't have to follow the different type of listing or private or whatever. You can literally devise your own holding structure, your own thing. In terms of management, yeah, I've learned a lot. You know, to summarize it would be hard, but I apply team mentality and coaching and momentum. Like, our values are tenacity, velocity, and ingenuity. Blackburn is 147 years old. Yesterday, the day before, and they had a crest at the time in Latin, arte et labore, which basically means style and hard work, style and graft. And you know, there's ethics, there's not ethics, but there's values in itself in that. And I think, you know, we don't have the same, but we basically have that mentality about ingenuity. Like, there's a bit of genius in everything we do. So if I'm coaching a football team, I'll let the players make their decisions. I used to coach a football team in a rugby boarding school. And in the rugby boarding school, if you know the sport of rugby, you're not really able to think, people debate this, but like, you can't change your position, right? Like, the formation's the same for every team. You have to have the same number of 15 players in the same position. And all the drills, there is some practice in the drills, but the same formations are the same time. Otherwise, people might get hurt. Whereas in football, it's completely different. Yeah, right?
Free flow.
Yeah, all the time. Like, it's just, there's always. And I remember coaching a team once, and we went to outside of the Pale in Ireland, but outside of the normal playing against rugby schools, and we played against the local district schoolboys. Yeah. and they hammered us. They beat us badly. And like I remember afterwards, like analysing, like why were they so much better than us? Because it was basically street football against boarding school football. It was basically street football against rugby players playing football. And like our guys were good, but they just weren't thinking on the pitch. And those guys were taking short corners, short kick-outs, quick tip-offs. They were just doing things that wasn't that. They were just thinking all the time as the game was happening, and we were kind of standing there, you know. And like, so I think like, you know, that's important in a lateral thinking sort of non-engineer business that this is, and media, and it sort of empowers people to think. And you know, same with momentum and energy, right? Like momentum is, you know, the best example is in tennis, right? You might see someone lose a set 6-love and win the next 6-love, but when the person's winning, you almost think that it's over.
Yeah, that's
right?
it. It's done. Yeah.
You think like there's no way. Like you just watch it, and then suddenly 30 minutes later, you're like, is this the same match?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing about momentum and things like that, and team and energy, that people who try and automate everything don't really get.
That's so many interesting points that you discussed. First of all, I really like how when you're talking about that, how with business, unlike, you know, maybe in certain more rigid structures, you can shape whatever narrative you want, you know, whether it's how many employees, home, like, you know, work from home, work from here, you know, it's a free flow. There's no, I guess, set formula on how you can do what you want to do, which I guess is quite it's quite liberating in a way, you know, because it's like you take your experience, you take all the lessons you've learned, you've seen what you like and don't like, and you can pick and choose from the best, you know, implement it. Unlike, you know, when for example, in the sports analogy, I think the rugby is a great example, because it is, you know, you have 5 of these players, 5 of those, you know, and so on. And what I'm curious about is, so you said your values are tenacity, velocity, and ingenuity. Now, the lesson, and I think the example you use, so how do you, using that example, that story you just told us about, you know, when you played against that outside school and, you know, you just got smashed. I guess, what are the lessons that you took from that in terms of, because in order to progress, you have to sometimes make some really tough decisions, and that might be, you know, next game, in that example, you got to leave, you know, these 2 players out, bring some new ones in. And I guess looking at business, when it comes to, I guess, building your team and managing it and understanding, you know, when is the time to, you know, maybe pull the plug, you know, unfortunately, or, you know, we need to maybe build on what we already have. How do you, I guess, make those distinctions, and how do you approach it? Because obviously that can be, you know, quite stressful at times.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in that. Like, it's definitely a leadership style. Like, you know, some of the things I would have done at the time when I was coaching might have been trying to be too persuasive, trying to sort of put ideas into the player's head about a style of play, or about, you know, reading the game before it happens, which is fine. But what I think, you know, sometimes you might give the wrong advice, or you might get people motivated too much and going out and think that they're amazing, and maybe they're not amazing. Maybe they come back and lose, and it's like, oh, maybe we thought we were too good. We just show up, we can win. Like, there's different things on that side of things, on persuasion and motivation. You know, with decision making in the business, the momentum, the velocity value is related to you have to do something right. You kind of need the right energy and momentum behind it, and you can't do everything at the same time. So there are some, you know, it's like juggling balls. Like, you can't do everything right, and you know, there's something coming up at the moment where, you know, one of the markets that we're in isn't going too well, and we're there, say, 18 months, and a few months into it, I kind of knew, and I had the chance to pull the plug, but I didn't. And now I don't regret it, because you know, it doesn't really matter if you've got a really long-term view on it, you know, and now we have the right reasons to change direction there. And it feels that we kind of gave it the chance, like if we would jump too soon. But these are all decisions in business and life.
Yeah.
And I think that my view to it is that if you can remain consistent, if you can show up every day, I mean every day, if you can show up every day, and if if you're applied all the time, and then if you can create this sort of environment around you, you know, there are things that will go in your favor that you don't control, and there are things that won't. But if you're on top of it enough to sort out the problem, when you have that energy and when you have that focus, and then you use some experience to deal with it. There's different styles. Like some people like to go kind of all in and all heavy and burn out and, you know, go for the big goals. I prefer a more steady,
steady build.
Yeah, steady. Like I like longevity. I like long term. I like looking at things. You know, everything compounds, right? So fitness compounds, investments compounds, knowledge compounds, and you know, when you're building blocks, like those little bits on top of it, audience compounds. You know, if you post every day and you get more views and more engagement, it grows, it builds, etc. Like 92 episodes of this podcast. You know,
very kind of you to say that. On the topic of you know, I think the story you mentioned is really interesting on, I don't know what the market you're entering is, but that you knew quite quickly that, okay, this is not probably going the way we would have maybe either expected it to go or wanted it to go, but making the decision, and you said if you look at something, I guess, like what I took from that is if you look at something long-term enough, then what's happening today doesn't seem like such a big deal. But also, I think there's a time, and like you said, with experience, there's a time when you know, like, even if I look at this long term, like, I don't see it, you know, playing out. And I know you guys have, I know Lovin Dubai was like I guess the flagship. This is what like kicked it off, you know, and then came Lovin Saudi and so on. And the story with Lovin Dubai was really interesting. I didn't know, you know, hadn't heard about Lovin, you know, Dublin before. I never knew about that. But you saw a model there that worked, and you're like, okay, the region here could use something like that. So on the Lovin Dubai topic, I got many questions because I think it's very interesting how you built it over the last few years. So first of all, I didn't know you guys bought 7 days. It's so funny. I was actually speaking to a friend of mine literally a few days ago. I'm like, what happened to 7 days? Where did that go? And then I found out, I'm like, okay, you guys bought the last bit of it, I think, you know, a few years ago. And then with Lovin, and then I know you guys launched Lovin Saudi, and now you're in 16 different territories. One thing that really struck me, and I think this is something as a content creator, I'm genuinely interested to learn from you, is that in 2016, you guys had about 250,000 views a month. And a year later, you were at 2.9 million. So I'm like, okay, so clearly Richard knows how to build audiences. My question is, like, how do you build it? What would you advise, for example, for someone like me on how to build an audience? Because I can speak, you know, honestly and freely, I've been going for two and a half years now. And do I have an audience now? Yes. Is it anywhere near it should be, in my opinion, for the level of work I've put in and how consistent I've been? No. So, you know, a couple of questions in there. But first, I guess, let's start with how did you guys build that audience?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think it's disingenuous on yourself to sort of compare it because, you know, there might be fast and slow news, right? There might be clickbait, social media, likes, engagement, and then, you know, someone listening to a podcast for 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So it's hard to kind of compare. But, you know, the short answer is that we growth hacked, we did clickbait, we posted all the time, and we developed formats, and we A/B tested, and we saw what worked. You know, and we knew what we wanted to achieve. Like, there was Lovin Dublin, but Lovin Dublin was then very different to what we sort of devised, and yeah, we adapted. Once we bought out of them, we adapted it for the region even more. And, you know, because media is different over here, and
True, yeah.
And also the audience is different over here. The things Irish people like isn't reflective of what a modern, you know, what people in this city likes. So yeah, but audience building, you know, I think if you could ask creators and content creators what they do, what influencers do. I think media is a bit different. I think if you know, going back to we were talking earlier about sort of mindset brands, and Lovin is loving your life. It's a mindset brand. It's populist.
Yeah.
We speak to 18 to 34-year-olds mainly, but it's mainly mindset, so it's age agnostic, and you know, we really go for that populist mainstream stuff.
Gotcha.
So we don't post press releases. We don't post things. We say communities and people, not companies. Like, the companies are ads, but the rest is just what happens in the street. And you know,
so it's like a running commentary of life in Dubai, basically.
Yeah, and over 7 years, like, it's really incredible how many things people send us. You know, like, I'm shocked the behavior type of people. They just tag Lovin Dubai in everything.
Oh, really?
Everything they do. Like, and I was wondering to myself, like, why don't I? Like, I'm putting up some stuff on social. Like, why don't I? Like, what are they thinking of when they're tagging Lovin Dubai? Like, how has that happened? Like, how has that happened? And it's happened because we basically engage with everything. It's the multiple lightweight engagements. We reshare, we capture things in real time, but we design a team. Like, we're sitting here, you just walk through the office and people are leaving. People are leaving because it's 6, 7 o'clock, but we're not done. There's someone else in another place working for 4 hours posting now tonight.
Yeah.
You know, because... And that's the difference. Now, other news organizations have shift work. I get it, but, like, you know, there is that sort of constant publishing, and that's our approach. That works for us.
Yeah, and on the concept of, I guess, what you were saying, you know, you were talking about, you know, the clickbait news, you know, you growth hacked it, you know, the populist kind of stuff. So you mentioned Gary Vee earlier, and about his philosophy of, you know, just post content consistently. Do you agree with that? Do you think, I'm not saying he's definitely not wrong given the success he's had, but I'm saying is that, I guess, is that a key that a lot of people, myself maybe possibly included, are not using? Is that the difference maker? Because because I've tried and done different things, you know, like, for example, my first year, I would post once a week. You know, I'd release the episode, there wouldn't be anything, but now there's like content, and now there's this and that. And honestly, I don't believe that content is the key anymore. You know, the consistent, like, the over posting or daily posting or whatever the case might be. What are your thoughts around, like, content?
Yeah, I think that, you know, fast and slow content, like, you know, this show, yeah, you're right. Like, it doesn't need to have 50 posts a day. But I think if you're doing local news and you're essentially a tabloid, then it needs it. Okay. Like, if Gary's posting all the time, then fine. But he also, you know, he has different approaches as well. But, you know, media has always evolved. Like, the trends in media right now are podcasts and newsletters. And one a week is fine. One a month, you know, like, it's fine. And you can have a very engaged audience. Mm-hmm. You don't always have to chase the algorithms. Like, the other trend in media is vertical video, right? TikTok sort of forced everyone to do it, and now it's not even TikToks, it's Reels, it's Shorts, it's everything like that. And, you know, the ads are coming there, and it's just a big space. So, you know, but I think Augustus Media, like, you walk through our studios, they're designed for text, audio, and video. So we believe a modern media company should do all three. Yeah. And it should do fast and slow news, and that's our view on it, right? Okay. Like, Disney might have a different view, Apple might have a different view. Like, what Apple create on Apple TV is different to what Gary Vaynerchuk does, right? Yeah. So it's very different, but like, you know, he would then probably still love a show on Apple TV, right? Yeah, exactly. But I think, you know, media has different forms. Like, Disney's view on media is different. You know, News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's view on media is different. Different lenses, different approaches. It depends on your objective as a company. It depends on who audience you're trying to reach. And then you just have to be commercially savvy as well, right? Like, if you want to do it as a business, or if it's just a hobby, then, you know, you kind of have to make decisions related to that too. Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, you know, making that distinction, because you will approach it in different ways. One thing I've learned, you know, from our conversation so far, and maybe something I wasn't aware of, is I get the sense that everything is relative. You know, it's relative to your industry, who you are, what your mission is, what are you trying to do, you know. So the formula that you guys have, for example, might not be the formula, like you said, Disney might have, or I might have, or everyone has a different perspective on that. On the audience part, just to round off the audience side, do you believe
Okay, so I don't know how to phrase this question. Okay, do you believe that if you're gonna start out in creating content in whatever world, whatever medium, whether it's media, whether it's this, whether it's that, do you believe that you have to identify the audience first and then create against that, or can you do it the other way? Create what you like, and you build it like the audience gets built that way. If you had to fall on either or, what would you say?
You can definitely do both. I mean, there's many content creators who just start posting stuff and find an audience and people and a following that they didn't really think about it. So I agree. I think, you know, afterwards you can retrofit it and you can call it something and you can build semantics around it and you can kind of say what it is. You know, I generally think that media can be mediums and media. And, you know, the media lens is basically, you know, what is that lens? Like, what are you talking about? Right? And I personally believe that if there's a cohort of behavior, if there's something that people are interested in, then there's a business opportunity to create media around that. Like, for example, if you support a football team, or if there's a sport that's popular, if paddle tennis is popular, then there could be a digital equivalent to a magazine around paddle, right? You know, go back to sort of retail investing in the US, right? Robinhood had sort of, I don't forget the numbers, I used to know these stats, but something like a few years ago, they used to have 15 million daily traders on Robinhood. And then, lo and behold, there's a newsletter in New York called Morning Brew. It does a daily newsletter that speaks to young people about the trading investment news that isn't Wall Street Journal, that isn't Bloomberg, and suddenly they get 4 million subscribers, right?
Right off that, yeah.
I think there's a correlation. I think there's a correlation between those things, right? If NBA is really popular, then ESPN can grow. Right, Michael Jordan, right? So I think there's a correlation between, right, if Premier League is popular, Sky Sports can grow, etc. So I think you can create media based on cohorts and behavior, and I think that that's one way to look at things. And you know, we're talking about sort of passion things and you know, sports and verticals, but it can be other things. Like, it can be there's a magazine in the US for the future of work. There's many gender specific media titles. There's I invested in a female platform in Saudi Arabia because it's not Lovin Saudi, but it's speaking to females from the Gulf, right? And I was speaking to Balkis yesterday, and she's just told me she hired someone from Oman. What she hires in Oman is very different for different reasons. Why I hired a student in Muscat, right, for Lovin Muscat, but she's quite clear on what Balkis for her is going to reach and what it's going to do and who it serves. You know, the execution is tricky, right? And, like, you know, the medium of whether she chooses to do fast social things and keep up with everyone on that, or whether she's kind of doing slower long form, 1,000 words on a newsletter, or a 45-minute conversation on a podcast, or a video series or a documentary, etc. So I think you kind of have to be aware of those things. Like, social media and digital, you know, it's a hungry beast. Like, it's never full. It's always hungry. You always have to feed it. The more you put in, and you still need to keep going. So you have to sort of bear those things in mind. Yeah,
I think that's a great, really, really interesting point that you talked about, how, you know, first of all, talking about the difference between, you know, the fast and slow media, and how, you know, those things satisfy different audiences, and given the work you're doing, it's going to kind of apply to what you're doing. And how an example you use, like how you would hire and the reasons you would hire for serve a different purpose, and for example how someone else would. Is it the type of content? Is it the audience I'm trying to reach? And I think this should be like a quote, you know, that digital is a hungry beast and social, because it really is, and it seems like it never stops. But I'm curious, I know in the early days you discovered digital, and then you did like a course, you know, a night course, and that's what kind of got you into it. So you've been in it for over 15 years now. I'm curious, what piqued your interest at the beginning, and now 15 years later, what would you tell what would you have told your younger self? Be like, oh, this is actually not what it turned out to be.
You know what I do every Saturday, Khaled? I sit down on the sofa and I read the Financial Times weekend, and I'm 39. When I was in my great aunt's house, a farm, in about 2005 in Ireland, and I was reading the FT, I was reading the financial newspaper, and I read a statistic about social media. And that was it. Like that planted the seeds, you know, like just looking at business and looking at seeing where things are going. And it took me, advertising was really hard industry because it's hard to see, right? Most agencies didn't talk about themselves. So it's hard to sort of, you know, I studied in the city, but I didn't come from Dublin. I didn't know many people in that industry. So I found it very hard to get a foot in the door. And that course helped me. And that course helped me, you know, I had a job in outdoor advertising. It helped me get a job in indoor advertising. But it was literally that. And, you know, I say to young I was on a podcast the weekend, and they said, what would you tell young people? I said, get into crypto. But I'm not getting into crypto. Like, I'm aware of it and I'm in it, but I'm not making big bets on it. I'm making big bets on streaming and big bets on different consumption things that I understand, and I see the growth. Like, I see the statistics, I see the growth, I see the revenue opportunities, I see the audience opportunities. It's hard, it requires investment, it requires patience, it requires time, but I see that, and, you know, it might be right, it might be wrong. Like, one of the things that, you know, it's hard to articulate how he says it, but Warren Buffett sort of says that, you know, you could pick the wrong industry, right? Like, you could pick stamp collecting, or you can pick you know, a type of you know, they say wrong time, like, you know, you can manufacture something that isn't popular at that time. So you have to be cognizant of that as well, right? Like, you know, maybe my passion, or maybe someone's passion for solving the streaming industry might be better served in going all in on Web3, etc.
Sure.
But I don't think we're closing. Like, personally, I think Web3 is an extension of Web2. I don't think it's replacing the internet. I think it's building on top of it.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
I think Web2 it builds on top of Web1. And if you think of it in terms of companies, right? Google's markup, although they're all down at the moment, but Google's markup was always higher than Facebook's. Pretty much, and Web2 companies didn't really surpass Web1 companies, and I personally think that Web3 will just be an extension on top of that, and I think Web2 companies will be well served in Web3, just like Web1 companies are well served now. Like, Web1 publishers on Google are doing really well now because of e-commerce. You know, there's a company listed in London, and they're global, called Future PLC, which have taken all the old magazines, and they do great digital revenue. They do far better digital revenue than any of the BuzzFeeds or any of these companies, any of the Web2 companies. So I think that companies like us, who are essentially a Web2 social media publisher, I think if we play our cards right and we understand what the promise of Web3 is, to provide value on the content created in Web2, you know, it's that sort of that missing link. You know, the $80 billion of advertising that Facebook got and didn't give anyone a penny, pretty much. You know, that's coming back.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to get back. I like where you talked about how, you know, there's that Web3, for example, builds on Web2, and how it's not a revolution, it's an evolution in a way. It's allowing you, as you know, for content creators and streamers, to, you know, start amplifying what you can do, and from a revenue perspective as well, and the possibilities that come from that. And it's interesting how it seemed like you've been very logical about, you know, you looked at, when you were younger, you looked at the numbers, you're like, okay, this is where things seem to be going, I want to, you know, get a part of that. And it seems that you're doing something similar now, you know, with Web3 and where that's coming. And I just have a few more questions for you, but kind of leads on to my last two, is So I know you, so on that podcast you talked about how the three different ways that you guys are, making revenue. There's the content with, client servicing, there's the creator economy, revenue subscriptions, and then there's direct to consumer. Now, I'd say personally over the last few years, I've noticed a big rise in direct to consumer. So I guess from your perspective, is Web3 that next? Does Web3 take all these to another level, or does Web3 give you the potential for revenue stream number 4?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it goes back to what you're saying about you can, when you were saying about businesses not having rules, etc. But I think structure is important, and structure and framework. Like in our company, everyone knows what department they are in. Yeah, sure, they collaborate, but everyone knows where they sit, who they report to, all that structure, despite the offices, despite the moving parts. And the same with our business. Everyone knows what our business revenue lines are.
Yeah.
And so we might, in time as the company grew, we added a department. So we took some of the commercial department and some of the content department and created the product department.
Gotcha.
Right? So the project management and IT went together, and that's the product department, which has a bit of ad tech, a bit of software development, and UX UI. So they all sit together now, right? So the same way with our revenue models, they might evolve. I think they're kind of future-proof, because I think direct-to-consumer is a bit broad, right? Like if Disney have a park, that could be direct-to-consumer because customers pay a ticket to go to the turnstile. But equally, direct-to-consumer could be the Disney Plus subscription, exactly. Or it could be the product in the store that they get in their licensing business. So it depends how you break down business units and divisions as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Revenue streams, like other people can have, other people would say that doesn't really mean anything. The 3 revenue streams that I've described, that you've sort of repeated there, people would say, well, what's Lovin Dubai's revenue? Well, what's Lovin Saudi's revenue? Well, what's Smashi's revenue? And then but I prefer to do it this way because I think it helps us plan, and a plan for say Web3.
Gotcha.
Like you're right, the audience revenue can be the creator economy, or it can be display advertising on the site as well, but the direct-to-consumer could be the token economy. So basically, and that's one way of thinking about, getting our guys to think about, our whole team to think about what are we doing here? How are we looking at payment gateways? How are we looking at value exchange when we're giving content to people?
Yeah.
On this podcast, if you did another 20 minutes episode as a bonus, you could put it on Apple and you could charge X dirhams,
yeah.
right? Now, why aren't Apple thinking, why isn't that token based right now? Will it be? Probably. I mean, I personally invested in Dogecoin, not because it was a meme coin. I invested it in 2018 because I believed in this stuff. I read that that was the tipping thing. It was the bit about the content. And when Elon Musk bought Twitter, like most people expect him to add Dogecoin as a payment gateway on Twitter, right? And that will be the last laugh on people who kept saying the media narrative that was a meme coin. Yeah, maybe, but and maybe it's a Ponzi scheme. Like, it's not investment advice. Like, maybe it's a whole joke. Like, everything's down at the moment or whatever. But I do fundamentally believe that, one, on sort of fintech, I'm not an expert, but I just think that things should move faster, right? Like,
sure,
Ubers get you places faster, then why doesn't money move faster? And I think that, I think there's a case for that sort of speed, and smart contracts kind of make logic sense on some way, and equally with sort of content and providing value to the creator.
Yeah.
If you're creating content on a platform and that platform is benefiting from you creating content, then where's your kickback? And I think that's where the tokens come in. Yeah.
I think you made a really good point about, on the direct-to-consumer model, and how through that there's so many different ways you can go about it, and how, maybe from a media or content creation perspective, you would kind of bypass, the traditional ways that people make money through content. But also you made a good point that, just now, about how if things do move in that way, if platforms are benefiting off you, then where is your take? I think it should be, I think that's fair. I don't know what it's going to look like moving forward, but I do feel podcasting is an interesting world, because I think there are people who are on platforms that you pay for, and there's others like mine that are free, because everyone has a different perspective. I just have my own view on how I want to do things. But I think now, if we're looking at, Web3 and the options that are going to be available to people, I think that is going to, you will see a rise in that, more of a subscription model for content creators, because I think it makes sense. I know there's stuff like Twitch now and YouTube and wherever, there are ways that people are doing that, but I think it will take that to the next level. Just to round off, Richard, from this fantastic conversation, man, it's really been really interesting talking to you and learning a lot from you. I know you guys with Lovin Dubai, or with the Lovin brand, are in 16 territories, and I heard you say you're like, I want to be in 100 territories, across the Middle East and whatever, and I don't want to be defined by a number. So I guess from your perspective, I'm curious, what's the reason you want to expand to that level, and why do you feel that the Lovin brand is so replicable no matter where you put it?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote down a mission like 7 years ago to be the modern media company of choice in the Middle East, and that means that we want people in the Arab world, really, we want people to choose our brands, and then by default advertisers to choose it. And that's the challenge. Like, you see a map on the wall out there. It's a reminder as well for people not just to think that we're creating content in Dubai, but we can think of the region as well.
Yeah.
How you do that is different. Like, Lovin Dubai could be a regional brand, right? Like, at what point did Washington Post become more than a state and a national title, and a same point about New York Times, right? So Lovin Dubai could be a regional or a global title. It depends on how you view it. I think the model for local works, and the second part of your question, I think what's replicable about it is the same rules apply, right? Like, what country are you from?
Me, Kuwait.
Okay, Kuwait. So if I told you there's every Arab country has its own favorite sweets and its own dishes, right?
Yeah,
so I'm sure that if we launched Lovin Kuwait,
yeah,
most likely Bilarabi, and if we did it, we would say that the top 10. We write an article about the sweets or the desserts that your mum makes or whatever, or we would say these chocolate bars that you remember growing up in Kuwait City if you grew up there. Or we would, the same rules apply. It applies in Lebanon, it applies in Jordan, it applies in Ireland. The nostalgia works.
Yeah,
proud of where you're
true.
from, the brands and the people that were born out of there. Pride in that. Like, we wrote about the Crown Prince here a lot on Lovin Dubai at the start, because he creates great content on Instagram. And we write about the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia and now in Doha as well, right? Like, so a lot of it is formula, right? It doesn't look like formula, but a lot of it is.
Interesting.
And, yeah.
That's very, very interesting. I never knew that, but I think it makes a lot of sense, capitalizing on people who are, notable figures in their respective spaces, and, they're making content, so why not build on top of that? I think it's a good plan.
Yeah.
Richard, I have just 2 more questions for you. These are questions I ask all my guests. So looking back either at your life, either personally or professionally, whatever it might be, when I ask you the question, what are you most proud of? What would you say?
I don't really know. It's hard to pick one thing. I don't really believe in sort of legacy or ego or things like that. That maybe there's some personal things. I like triathlon. I completed an Ironman.
You did,
and that wasn't easy. I failed the first time, and it took me 2 years of training. There was. So I'm proud of that, but my brother just finished the New York Marathon yesterday, and I did that in 2010. I just remember, some of those things you feel pride when you're crossing the line because they're hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get emotional because you just think of how hard you work for it.
Yeah.
And but I'm proud of I get joy out of seeing the team at work here. I get joy out of seeing young people who want to have a career, walk through these doors, get a job, and at the end of the year being able to celebrate and maybe give them a bonus. Like,
yeah,
that's pride, but I don't take it for granted for a second. I don't get complacent for a second, because it's fragile, right? And you have to keep going.
True. Very, very true. Congrats on doing an Ironman, man. Even if I trained my whole, I would never even think or consider doing it. But I think, you know, what I'm getting from that is you're just proud of seeing the results of what you've worked so hard for. You know, whatever it was, whether it was a triathlon, whether it was building this business, or whether it was the success of someone starting their career. And the last message, I ruined the question. I'll redo it. And the last question I have for you, Richard, is what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
Just support Khaled, because he's putting a lot of effort into this, and
best quote ever, guys.
Give him feedback, tell him what you want on the show, like, comment, subscribe, and build this podcast.
That's the best last message I've heard in all my episodes, guys. Matt, Richard, this has been really an absolute pleasure, man. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Congrats on everything you've done. I've learned a lot from you, and I think anyone, either they're a content creator, they're in media, they're working at agencies. So many people can take a lot from what we talked about today. So thanks so much, man.
Thanks a lot. And thank you too for taking the time. It's a pleasure being on the show.
No, thanks so much. Guys, to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, if you like Lovin Dubai, then you know who Richard is. Check out their stuff. Please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast at hope.it.helps on Instagram. And as always, guys, hope it helps.
Hope it helps. Cheers.